My fellow residents and friends of Cupertino, good evening. Please rise as we pledge allegiance to the flag, and my daughter Allison Paul will be leading us tonight.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate you and your sister Annabelle being here this evening to support Dad. Earlier today in the afternoon, I spoke to the importance of sustaining a culture of volunteerism. Tonight, I'd like to cover a few issues of interest to our residents. I'd like to also address a couple of larger issues of our day. Basically, I'd like this address to be the opposite of what we think of as political verbiage. And with this backdrop in context and general aim, I'd like to continue the address this evening with several selected issues of importance and relevance to my fellow residents in Cupertino. And these issues by virtue of our basic interconnectedness, which of course of late has received a number of upgrades, and by of late I mean maybe in the last 15 years or so, in quality and speed. And they are ones that affect and are affected by a much wider community. Before I move into the evening speech, I'd like to thank some of the elected officials from the area that didn't make it to the luncheon and are here tonight. From the Campbell City Council, we have Liz Gibbons. Thank you for making it out this evening. And I'll need a show of hands. Are there any other electeds that made it out to tonight but not for the luncheon? Oh, Yangfeng Chow from the CUSD, Cupertino Union. Thank you very much for being here tonight. And I see a finger pointed in with one more person. Oh, Lydia Kuo from Palo Alto. Thank you for making it out tonight. Very nice to see you. And also, I'm not sure if your vice mayor was acknowledged. I want to thank Eric Filseth, the vice mayor of Palo Alto, for making it out for the luncheon as well. Before I move on to the evening speech, I'd like to introduce again our Cupertino City Council. In addition to myself, we have Vice Mayor Rod Sinks, Councilmember Barry Chang had an event up in Oakland that he had to attend tonight. We also have here tonight Councilmember Savita Vaidyanathan and Councilmember Stephen Scharf. And our executive staff members, City Manager David Brandt. I remember at a chamber event a number of years ago, it was probably back in 2010 or 2011, right when you started, David, it was a monthly mixer. I said, David, are you going to be city manager when I'm mayor? And this is a good 6 years ago, and you said, I sure hope so. And you know, I'm very glad that you're here. We're very lucky as a city to have your calm and even keel temperament and ability. So thank you for everything that you bring to the city. Our city attorney, Randy Hom. Randy, you here tonight? Randy, good to see you. Our assistant city manager and community development director, R.T. Srivastava. Thanks for making it out tonight. Our director of public works, Tim Borden. So our excellent roads, everything else, public works and infrastructure. Thank you, Tim, for delivering that in the last several years. It's very excellent. And as well as a very good bike and ped plan going forward, which I will actually get to in my canned remarks, so more later. Thank you for the anticipation. Our Administrative Services Director, Christina Alfaro, is here tonight. Our Innovation and Technology Director, Bill Mitchell. Our City Clerk, Grace Schmidt, is here tonight. And our newest hire, Recreation and Community Services Director on our executive team, Jeff Milkus, couldn't be here tonight, but he does an excellent job, and this is one of the facilities that his department oversees. let's get right into the issues and talk about development. One of the issues that gets frequent attention in Cupertino is development and what to do with particular spaces. This past year, we held a speaker series of panels addressing retail, housing, and transit. This was, all in all, a well-received effort by our city to bring forth to the community a discussion-based format for considering the various issues that we face with developing our spaces. A particularly significant space is the Valco Shopping Mall, which has been there since the fall of 1976. And there's the image of our iconic sign that you can see off the freeway. 1976 is an interesting year, as it also happens to be the year that Apple was founded, and the year I was born. I'm actually 2 weeks older than Apple, which is incorporated on April 1st. So I'm a St. Patrick's Day baby, 2 weeks earlier on the 17th of March. But in any event, the community and the sum totality of it with respect to our discussions greatly enjoyed the informative discussions last year. We were able to see experts interact in detail under some understandable and intuitive propositions, namely that retail is in a state of flux, housing is in demand, and that traffic is getting worse. Retail is an interesting topic, made further interesting with respect to the fact that Cupertino is Apple's hometown. Extraordinary things happen here which have had worldwide repercussions in the presentation of modern cutting-edge products. And in fact, even though nothing was on sale there, the first iterations of the Apple stores, from what I understand, existed right here in Cupertino. And it's fascinating to think about how when you drive around our city, any number of interesting things are happening that may well have a significant, and we hope, beneficial impact on the planet and our fellow inhabitants. You know, I don't think this is too premature to say, but I think money as a tool seems like it's here to stay. And by extension, retail is something that we should keep considering. Certainly, for instance, smartphones have taken a fairly strong hold. But maybe the whole idea should be to slow things down and to take our time, let things breathe, give us space. It is fascinating indeed. Maybe we can think about our modern capabilities and come up with some really extraordinary retail experiences in Cupertino that end up becoming widespread. Maybe we can promote clean energy usage through our use of space. Maybe we can think about how we take yesterday's garage and perhaps supplement it, perhaps reimagine it. I don't know, but something tells me that we're sitting on an opportunity to work with our hometown advantages, and I appreciate that this opportunity is not one that exists in the absence of well-resourced interests. We have done fantastically well economically. But the thing is, successful economics really comes down to maintaining integrity in a few trust-based relationships. You trust your government not to misuse the resources that you give it. And I know some people find that completely hilarious, but really, it is very critical. Some will also tell you that you should always let people behave however they feel like behaving, and that the so-called free market will figure it all out. I think generationally, we have enough experience to just state that that's obviously and completely incorrect. We have figured out by now that some of the well-resourced, if not held to account, and this is true of everyone really, they'll use their resources in order to get what they want, irrespective of particular considerations. Some of these considerations are quite important. And so what I'd like to do here is simply make clear the basic considerations behind, first, what seemed to me, after several years of evaluating community feedback and the key considerations of our community regarding what they are, and second, my own sense of what's practical, responsible, and keeping up with our historical norms and behavioral patterns, which in Cupertino are actually quite good if you really look at the data. But first, let me share with you what I'd personally like to see. And as an aside, in this regard, I just want to say, from the perspective of good governance, I think it's critically important that people, that you elect, put their cards, so to speak, on the table. We're entitled to our opinions. This is a First Amendment country, free speech, right? Freedom of thought and freedom of all sorts of things that help make our lives enhanced with greater happiness and liberty. But with respect to the representation, I think the representation is the critically important part. We need to be able to take the community sentiment, process it, and weigh it against the other various factors. And I greatly thank the many various mayors and former council members that have made it out this evening. I know I'm not really speaking to anything new with regard to that, to their years. And a lot of them were actually at the luncheon as well. So I'm not trying to be rude or be non-formalistic in not acknowledging them. But I think, at the end of it, it is critically important that we have an open book, because ultimately our system is a privilege, and we're able to come up with all these better solutions because of the fact that we have a lot of these considerations on the table. But I just want to reiterate, the opinions I'm sharing here, they're strictly my own perspective. But in real estate, as we know, the comps are important. For Valco, there happens to be a convenient comparable just north of there, in Apple Park. The Valco space sits on approximately 58 acres. So here's an aerial of the Valco space. Apple Park sits on approximately 176 acres. The amount of square footage of developed space that Apple has made is approximately 3,621,000 square feet. Translated to 58 acres, this is a floor area ratio, if you will. And this is a surprising number to me. I actually recalculated it last night after getting some verification of the numbers from our staff. The floor area ratio of the Valco Park, of Apple Park translated to Valco, is actually approximately 1.2 million square feet, which is actually quite the coincidence, because that happens to be the current square footage of Valco Mall. And I originally thought it was 1.5 million, but based on the original calculation, I was under the impression it was something like 4 million square feet of developed space over in the Apple campus. It's actually more like 3.6. So that's where I get my personal preference for square footage. But that's strictly personal, and it can be informed by other factors, of course. But I think square footage is a fairly valid way of considering the overall feel and effect of a space. True, there are ways to make a given amount of square footage feel substantially different. I respect that. I respect the modern day capabilities. But insofar as the potential openness and opportunities to interconnect with the natural ecology are concerned, I think you start with a minimal footprint and you work upward from there. And actually in 2009, when I first ran for city council in Cupertino, I held a campaign right across Tantau in what is the midst of Apple Park now. It's a building occupied by a technology division of Panasonic in the current day. I knew one of the people developing the building, and they spent a substantial amount of resources and commitments to what we think of as green building and also reclamation. Not everyone knows this, but our valley was once at the forefront of the country insofar as the density of Superfund sites needing environmental reclamation were concerned. This is because in the early days of chip manufacturing, the disposal of materials was, shall we say, somewhat more casually regulated. No one argues these days that burying toxic waste near and in the middle of residential areas is not a great thing. And this also is what I mean by the fact that we do need some oversight. It just needs to be informed and intelligent. Anyway, the developers of this building were spending a lot of resources to make sure that the building was very green, and that the soil reclamation was thorough, with a couple of different pump and cleaning systems on site that you wouldn't even notice were there unless someone told you about them. It was at that time that I held a campaign event at this site to highlight these efforts. And I'm so pleased now, almost a decade later, that we have a space in town that is not merely carbon neutral. It will generate more electricity than it uses. It has real open space, and it is being used for the good purpose of continuing the excellent work set forth by one of our hometown companies. Of course, that space is not entirely open to the general public. However, due to the efforts of the company, and I think some encouragement by our council and public, we do have a visitor center for Apple that is completely unique and which is a part of the new campus. Through this experience and observation generally, I think that it does take a fair bit of thought and organization and effort to consider how we use the best of our knowledge to keep our spaces interconnected to the ecology as well as aesthetically functional. A lot of that work is delivered by our city. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our planning commissioners, some of whom are in attendance this evening. Don Sun is our chair. Is Don here tonight? Jeff Paulson, I saw Jeff here. He's our vice chair of the Planning Commission. Yeah, thank you. Jerry Liu is here next to Jeff. And David Fung. David, are you here this evening? All right. And Alan Takahashi. I'm not sure I saw Alan. But I want to thank the commission for the volunteer work that you do in balancing the requests of applicants and the input that we get from the community. This project is one of many. But as I say, much, if not all, of the nitty-gritty of the detailed work here is delivered by our city staff. While putting together this address, I did put in a few late nights and early mornings in City Hall. It's true, on perhaps one or two occasions, I ended up leaving maybe around 6 in the morning. But you know, on one of those occasions, I ran into one of our building inspectors getting ready for work and arriving at City Hall. Our staff has people who have worked so well and with so much quiet integrity, not just now or for the Apple Campus project, but throughout the city, from public works to our parks, and from keeping our records in order to making sure that everyone adheres to building standards. I know that it's not always pleasant, but it needs to be done, and of course, there is always room for improvement. From what I've seen, there is a willingness to improve, and there's certainly a great deal of good work being delivered. And I think that our staff should really be given credit for all that they do here. Please, give them all a hand. Valco Shopping Mall is 1.2 million square feet of retail. While it's probably true that the retail experience can be informed by current capabilities and even improved while saving some space, it would also seem apparent that some reasonably substantial amount of space is still necessary for the quality of our modern-day retail experiences. True, as all of our other capabilities have been informed by experience and ingenuity, so has the design of our interior and interactive areas. It's not too much to ask, however, that we preserve half of what is there now for retail. And it seems to me that we have a landowner and staff committed to ensuring that this happens. Retail connects to quality of experience. I ask that we look to some of the standards set by Apple for trying to define how we approach retail. Let's use some creativity and imagination, as well as some good anticipation as to what we can deliver. People obviously still need recreational activities such as, for example, ice skating, bowling, and going to the theater. Health and fitness are very important, and it's always unfortunate to see those types of opportunities disappear. But what can we do with all this knowledge that we've gathered and all of this capability that we've gained? The richest person in the world owns a company that aspires, in not too much of a stretch, to deliver consumer products ordered on the internet within the same day. We've come quite a ways from the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and perhaps this is the right time and place to be asking ourselves whether we can meld the elements of the mall, which was also quite the step away from the mail order catalog, with our new capabilities. Is it all experiential? At the very least, our spaces would seem to be able to be utilized more efficiently. And this is the strangeness, if you will, of it all. One would think that with all this time that we're saving, and with all this space that we're saving, that we should be a lot more free to do the things that we enjoy within spaces that can better address what we all want to see. What is it that's happening here? Why are we even busier and more congested to the extent that we are? I think that we need to ask first whether it's possible to achieve our preferences, and if we do that in a positive fashion, then answer the question of what we need to do to get to that point. In my opinion, if anyone is looking to build a legacy, a testimony to their time on this planet and their contributions to their fellow human beings, then that would be the couple of standards to follow. For me, and again, this is just personally, without seeing applications and definitely keeping an open mind with respect to the possibilities out there, the limits of freedom and functionality would seem to be around 1.2 million square feet based upon the comparable. But I'd like to see incubator space and clean technology development. Of course, then, what does that leave out if we've talked about retail and office space? Right, residential space. The issue here is that the utilized office space, constructed not just here, but throughout the area, has created the need for housing for people who work in these spaces. A numerical metric that is very useful in determining whether a given jurisdiction is balanced in this regard is known as the jobs to housing ratio. This ratio is a factor used by the Association of Bay Area Governments, also known as ABAG, which has recently merged with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, so it's ABAG MTC now, to help determine what our responsible allocation of housing is for a given 8-year period of time, the current implementation period of which runs from 2015 to 2023. A 1.5 ratio of jobs to housing is considered good, and that's what the overall ratio is in the entirety of Santa Clara County. If, for every 1.5 jobs, we have 1 unit of housing, that is considered a good mix. It helps to account for living space being in close enough proximity to jobs such that workers have a place to live close by, if they choose to live close by. True, not everyone takes this option, but from a quantifiable perspective, if you adhere to these proportions, you can have the overall benefits of available and appropriate spaces complementing each other. Now, when this proportion gets out of balance and in favor of too many jobs, then you tend to see housing shortages and increased traffic patterns. And I will concede that no metric is perfect and that our jurisdictional borders are not necessarily the be-all and end-all of defining how we apply this analysis and looking at needs. However, the data is real. It has good utility, nothing is perfect, anything can get better, and this gives us a tangible message with observable repercussions that are and will continue to be experienced. If you evaluate these ratios in any given city in this area, you will see that there is indeed a fair reflection of housing demand, as well as impacts on traffic. Office space corresponds for obvious reasons to jobs. Generally, calculations that translate office space to jobs range from 250 to 300 square feet of office space per job. But in actuality, calculations of jobs and the jobs to housing ratio don't strictly go by square footage. The numbers that are used are actual or derived from this and other data that get as close to actual as possible. And so, with that preface, where is it that we in Cupertino stand in this regard? Let's take a look at this question, both historically and with respect to our neighboring jurisdictions. And by historically, I mean with respect to the last time we have tangible data in 2010. Cupertino is highlighted here in this chart. And as you can see, Cupertino has been historically quite responsible insofar as meeting our obligations to the larger community where keeping our numbers of jobs and housing units balanced is concerned. You can see that in the last year where we have census data available, 2010, that our jobs to housing ratio stood at 1.29. So that's below the 1.5 optimal threshold. We are in fact exceeding our obligations to the greater community as of 2010. However, our best projections for 2040 have increased since that time. It's not at a point where anyone can justifiably say that we're at a critical level where drastic measures must be taken, but the data is telling us that we should pay more attention to ensuring that our housing stock keeps in balance with our job growth. We are projected at this point, if no housing units are added, to be at a ratio of approximately 1.66 to 1 in the year 2040. And that's based upon projections of 2040 derived in the year 2017. This is what I find interesting and informative about this data. If you look at it, it's not really just a reflection of how many jobs we have and how many homes we have. It's also a reflection of our approach as a community. Certainly we can point and compare with other communities and rationalize. But instead, we in Cupertino tend to take the approach that we take care of meeting our obligations responsibly, so that when future opportunities arise, we're prepared thoroughly to optimize those opportunities. That's why I'm not really making any kind of personal policy decisions here. My job in this elected capacity is in large part to reflect and continue our community approach, particularly in those areas where we've been historically successful. That's why, from a policy-based position, albeit just in reflection, again, of my 1 vote in 5, it seems to me that we should be focused a bit more on housing at this point. The circumstances are not dire. We have good options. But certainly the time to act would be at this point if we're following our historical behavioral pattern. And of course, the problems that we have are ones that have been created by success. We can absolutely build upon that success, but let's not do it in a vacuum, devoid of adherence to the good thinking and approaches that got us here in the first place. As far as I'm concerned, Cupertino should continue to meet its responsible obligations to the greater community while looking out for the interests of its residents. And the pathway to doing so in the context of how we approach development in the relatively near future is quite clear and achievable. Living spaces represent quite the exciting opportunity to explore what we know and how we live. And the same goes for retail. One way to think about retail is quite straightforward. How would you like to spend your money? And it seems that we do like our theater and would have even appreciated a greater variety of them insofar as selections of offerings and ability to put forth live performances, for instance, are concerned. Our ice rink, our bowling alleys, and our physical fitness facilities. There does seem to be a longing in our community for spaces to connect us with what we think of as the traditional retail activity of purchasing consumer goods. But where is the balance these days when we in the totality are such savvy and steady customers? Ultimately, the industry will need to meet the demand for this higher quality, which in the final analysis is a good thing. We have a company within our borders that does this, and now we have an opportunity to open our doors again to retail that takes into account and makes good use of enhanced abilities. First, to save space because anyone with a smartphone can shop for virtually anything. And second, to save even more space because our delivery capabilities allow us to store goods more cost effectively. But these factors should all be balanced with each other. I'm certain that an ecosystem of possibility still allows for people who are clever and committed enough, but mostly committed enough, to deliver a fantastic traditional retail experience. If we want to support more of what we'd like to see, then please put forth the suggestions as to who we look to bring into the community in this regard. You might have heard recently that there is a specific plan process that's kicking off for Valco. Please participate. And I ask that all stakeholders participate in good faith. We're in a very optimistic position. And if we do this, I'm confident that we can get to a very good agreement and consensus point. After all, the free market is nonetheless quite powerful, and we can apply what we've learned empirically over the years to better harness the benefits that come when you provide people freedom to take action and make choices within a fair and efficient framework. With our modern knowledge and historical wisdom, looking at this optimistically, Cupertino does have a number of options here as we proceed carefully to envision space that meets our aspirations and our obligations. Before we move on to the next topic, I did want to share something with you. When we speak of development in Cupertino, the opening of Apple Park not only created a buzz locally, but also globally. I'd like to share this video from our neighbor and hometown company, Apple, and thank them for providing it. Of the blue moon lunar eclipse. It's pretty perfect. All right, let's go on to parks. And so Apple has put forth a remarkable space within our borders, one that we hope will support its endeavors and speak to the interests of the broader, much broader community for many years into the future. We'll be there to support these efforts. We get that this is a publicly traded corporation, but a corporation nonetheless that has shareholder interests to bear in mind. But like our Chamber of Commerce, which has as its legal reason for existence advocacy to our jurisdiction in the interests of the business community, any given business can make the same decisions regarding their more localized involvement. It just so happens that Apple lives in a small town environment and does have to balance the interests of the company with, depending upon the day, what is sometimes the largest market capitalization in the world, and more cash reserves than, frankly, most countries. But I still maintain that you're only as wealthy as how wisely you spend your resources. You can take that wisdom with you anywhere you go, after all. And that wisdom has guided us in Cupertino to make strides to develop ecologically sound park spaces throughout our community. Let's take a step back and see where we stand in this regard and where we can potentially go next to deliver healthy spaces. We have, as a city, recently acquired a residential space next to Blackberry Farm. This will allow us to make a much-needed separate pedestrian path into the park rather than having foot traffic walk up and down San Fernando, sharing the narrow road with vehicles. This is a really good thing, and it took us all of a couple of months to make this decision. I would like to give some attention to an area of Cupertino that doesn't have as much city-owned and operated park space. Here's a map of what park distribution in Cupertino looks like. Parks are in green, clearly. As you can see, this area of Cupertino, on the eastern side, the Rancho Rinconada neighborhood, is particularly lacking in park space. There are other areas as well, granted, such as where I live in northern Cupertino, but as far as the areas with opportunities for the acquisition and provision of significant amounts of public use and park space, Rancho Rinconada represents a significant opportunity in that the neighborhood adjoins a space that is both significant in size and location. This location is just south of where Calvert Drive meets Lawrence Expressway, and if Midway on the eastern side of Lawrence Expressway extended over to the Cupertino side, then that would be the southern border of the space that we could dedicate to public park use. Such a use could potentially be passive or active. One of the considerations is the fact that it does adjoin busy Lawrence Expressway. That is true. And I actually remember my first action as a Parks and Recreation Commissioner back in 2007 was to recommend that we put a black iron gate around Franco Park so that little kids wouldn't run out in Homestead. And it's funny how these things interconnect. Maybe 7 or 8 years later, I had the great benefit of using that park and making sure my kids didn't run out because there was a black iron gate surrounding Franco Park off of Homestead. So it's nice. But with respect to this particular space that we'll call Lawrence Midi, the utility of this space as a trail extension for the San Tomas Aquino-Saratoga Creek Trail has long-ranging repercussions and beneficial ones for how we improve quality of life in Cupertino and in the entire region. We have done a good job with Stevens Creek running through McClellan Ranch, through Blackberry Farm, and the city-owned historic Stockmeyer property, which contains one of our remaining orchards. The question we now need to ask is whether we are willing to put in the work to ensure that society at large in our community doesn't simply write off certain areas as impervious to application of our modern-day ecological principles as they intersect with the spaces where we live and commute. To me, the answer is obvious, that there is no such practical barrier as to render the one impervious to the other. And I think that we all appreciate that this is true. We don't just write off areas. We should continue to set a standard in a careful and measured manner. It's certainly not necessary to be reckless in order to do good things. But now, after more than 30 years, and especially as set against the backdrop of a land acquisition that took us much less than a single year to finalize near Stevens Creek, we should start to do the same thing for Saratoga Creek. It's a real commitment, true, and if I were here 10 years ago, it would certainly not have been the right time. All right, the point is this. We are not at a time right now where it's a stretch to obtain this space and dedicate to a use that improves quality of life and interconnections. As we look to the next generation, we will want to be able to improve the Lawrence 280 interchange. And when we do that, we should consider what we need to do in order to ensure that this pathway we have doesn't just abruptly stop right here, just south of where the red triangle is. The Saratoga Creek, if we choose to dedicate our knowledge and resources, which are both available, can connect us all the way from the bay to the foothills. And we don't need to weave this out of whole cloth through existing neighborhoods over already existing uses. Our interconnectivities and park spaces at large are being well considered by our staff and our citizenry. Public Works and Recreation and Community Services are both hard at work, bringing forth visions to reality in these regards. I'd like to recognize the heads of those respective departments again at this time. Tim Borden and Jeff Milkus, if you would please stand, and let's give them a big hand. Thank you. And we have members of our community who serve on the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission, as well as on the Parks and Recreation Commission, whom I'd like to recognize for all of their efforts on creating plans related to pedestrian access, bicycle routes, and our entire system of parks. It's a lot of time and dedication to be the public interface for these efforts, and so please, give them a hand. On the Bike Ped Commission, I did see that we had Pete Heller here tonight. And if there's anyone I'm missing, let me know. Oh, Jennifer Sheeran is here as well. And I'm not sure if we have any of our Parks and Recreation commissioners, but there's actually a significant overlap in membership between that commission and the Cupertino, Italy Sister City Committee. And they're hosting a delegation here tonight. But if we have any Parks and Recreation commissioners here tonight, oh, okay, great. It is through these efforts that we better prepare to keep thriving while keeping our community happy, healthy, and interconnected. I'd like to transition at this point to the topic of disaster preparedness. Our preparedness also extends most critically to matters having to do with emergency management and response. Cupertino has a very robust and active emergency response corps of committed staff and volunteers. Claire Francavilla, our emergency services coordinator, is a recent hire. Is Claire here tonight? Hi, Claire. Please stand. Welcome. Claire has dedicated her working life to ensure that our families are as safe as possible during an emergency. But she is not alone. As with many other aspects of our community, there are groups of community volunteers that make us, in this case, safer. Members of our Public Safety Commission are here this morning as well. Our chair, Jerry Tallinger, just finished his term as one of our Public Safety Commissioners, and I'd like to thank him for all of his work. Vice Chair Andy Wong, are you here this evening? Our commission member, Robert McCoy, I know is here. And if I'm, yeah, thank you for being here tonight. And I believe I saw Yvonne Chow, but that might have been at the luncheon. All right. Any other public safety commissioners in attendance? Well, thank you for everything that you've done to keep Cupertino safer. Our public safety, yes, thank you. Let's give them another hand. Our Public Safety Commission represents just some of our many groups committed to ensuring that we are ready in emergency situations. There's also the Cupertino Amateur Radio Emergency Service, also known as CARES, our Medical Reserve Corps, and the Community Emergency Response Team, also known as CERT. Unfortunately, signups for CERT by Cupertino residents has dipped in recent years. I encourage you all to visit the city's website periodically to find out when the next CERT Academy is coming up. There will be one in March that will be taught in Los Altos Hills, and then there will be one in June that will be taught right here in Cupertino. This year, in addition to the incredible efforts of our volunteers, I would like to see the integration of data aggregation and artificial intelligence technology and the like efforts combined with our technological capabilities that anticipate areas of need in various emergency scenarios. That technology is out there, and tonight I am pleased that we are joined by people at the private sector and nonprofit forefronts of our emergency preparedness efforts. Ahmed Wani, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called One Concern, a company using modern-day data aggregation analytics to help us deliver better preparedness and responses to scenarios involving earthquakes, floods, and fires, is here tonight. Ahmed, welcome. Nicole Hu, the co-founder of One Concern, as well as here, and is their Chief Technology Officer. Thank you for being out here. We are also joined by Ken Torin, the CEO of the Silicon Valley chapter of the American Red Cross. Ken? Good to see you. I commend Mr. Wani and Ms. Hu for their concern and dedication, and I thank Mr. Torn for being here to support our community this evening as well. A note about this evening's discussion and setup. We've purposely created a roundtable format for the purpose of continuing discussions after these remarks. And so please, after my remarks conclude, get some refreshments if you wish, and have a chat with Ken and Nicole and Ahmed and your friends, neighbors, and colleagues. Efforts like theirs and yours are critical in ensuring that we are as prepared as we can be in emergency situations brought about by earthquakes, fires, floods, and all of these things are actually part of our potential experiences. Our staff is currently examining whether the software brought forth by Ahmed and Nicole and their company, and they're trying to determine whether our systems that we use in Cupertino can be improved in this manner using data aggregation and artificial intelligence. And essentially what it does is that it takes the structures in your jurisdiction and it imposes upon it some parameters of various disasters. So you could pick a fault line, so say just randomly close by, and impose a type of earthquake on it at any given depth. And you could actually try to figure out where your structural damage is statistically likely to be. And so you can imagine how powerful this could be in a situation where you're trying to prepare, where you're trying to drill and respond, but also how powerful it can be when something like this actually happens, because there are gaps that any community may not know about. So it's fascinating stuff, and I look forward to the evaluation, being able to see whether we can actually embrace, here in Cupertino, this technological possibility, and of course, ultimately save lives. I know that it's oftentimes difficult for many to think about these situations before the fact, but it's exactly before the fact that we need to be considering and preparing for them. I thank our community volunteers such as Stuart Chesson and Fari Aberg, who in providing on-the-ground emergency services for organizations such as the Red Cross, and for purposes such as ensuring that we have medical personnel available at certain of our outdoor community events, make sure that we respond with efficacy and intelligence and competence, and that we anticipate with intelligence and organization. I commend and support your efforts. I'd like to talk a little bit about our library and City Hall at this point. We have a great deal of participation in this community and a strong appetite for gathering in a highly valued place, the Cupertino Library, which is part of the Santa Clara County Library District. Recently, I saw Cupertino's community librarian working the children's desk, and I have to tell you, I was deeply impressed. Claire Verizio is our community librarian for the Cupertino Library, and is here this evening, along with the head of, is Nancy here this evening? Well, but Claire's here this evening, so let's give Claire a very big hand. We appreciate you for bringing forward this cherished community resource. The library truly is a special place with a priceless type of value that one would be hard-pressed to quantify, but not now. Nonetheless, because we are where we're at right now, we can attempt to do so, and there's even a handy website that does. There's a value calculator brought forth by the American Library Association. With regard to the Cupertino Library, we deliver an estimated value of at least $35 million annually to the community. And I'm sure that Claire would be happy to provide you with a line item breakdown of the value of the various services. But one thing I'd like to see make significant progress in this year is a well-considered and planned out expansion of the library such that we are not needing to scale back on the various events and gatherings that the community would like to have. Our community hall has been pushing the limits of its availability until the library made responsible decisions that were difficult, but again, the responsible thing to do, to scale back on its well-received and well-attended offerings to the community held at Community Hall. Now is the time to provide that space to our community so that we can accommodate all of the groups and discussions, story times and classes that we have the strong motivation and eagerness to attend. In the same general civic space, I'd like to see that we keep on engaging with the community to see what is desired and needed at City Hall. A plan was considered a couple of years ago, but funding became an issue. Given that we are on a good track of engaging with our citizenry in a manner designed to inform and interact, it seems that we could take that same pattern of approach and get something done with our future plans for City Hall this year. And we are not so far away in a practical sense. The plan itself, while subject to some aesthetic concerns insofar as how it fit in with the tenor of the civic area neighborhood, was actually delayed due to the funding aspect of it. We appeared to have a majority of people willing to look at a budget of $50 million rather than $70 million. But I do think that we can achieve all aspects of what we want, including palatable aesthetics, as well as addressing our need for sufficient amounts of space for our staff. Currently, for instance, the city attorney's office, the folks that make all the legal analysis in the city, is entirely removed in a different building from the rest of our staff. And we can possibly place a fully functioning emergency operating center, or EOC, at City Hall, and more community meeting space. With regard to the EOC, another good option is being explored in the Corporation Yard next to the southern point of the Don Burnett bicycle and pedestrian footbridge along Mary Avenue. And so our prospects are optimistic, and it's a time of well-considered potential adjustments of both our private and public spaces here in Cupertino. I'd like to end this evening's address with a topic of critical importance to everyone's future. This is the mental health of our teens. I know that mental health is an issue that affects people of all ages, but I'd like to approach the issue this year through the lens of seeing whether we can initiate a couple of projects that will help bring about broader perspective, as well as provide some activities that help us all keep in mind that ultimately our priorities are set in ensuring healthy and happy lives for our future generations. And yes, it is true that ensuring that health and happiness does intertwine with notions of competitiveness and all sorts of complicated and interrelated issues. But what I'd also like to see is that energy and enthusiasm being directed towards, for instance, participation in volunteer activities. Did you know that we used to have a volunteer fair in Cupertino? It was held at the top level of the Flint Center garage. I would like to bring that back to Cupertino, and we will. We will hold it near the end of the school year, when students and their families are thinking about their summer plans. Let's coordinate and work with all of our wonderful and amazing volunteer-oriented organizations throughout this community to show our students and families all the many opportunities for answering the needs, interests, and aspirations of volunteers in this free and interconnected society of ours. And in an effort to more directly address the issue, I'd like sometime near the beginning of the school year to hold another type of fair, this one specifically focused upon the topic of mental health. And for this, I appreciate the partnership of our school districts, the Cupertino Union, the Fremont Union High School District, and the Foothill De Anza Community College District, as well as that of our various private educational endeavors. We deeply appreciate and need the participation of our county jurisdictions and health organizations, as well as various nonprofits that have a stake in the provision of mental health services. But this is more expansive than one might think. In addition to the County of Santa Clara's Health Services Department and, for instance, major medical stakeholders such as Kaiser Permanente, which interestingly enough does have deep and existential roots in this very community, we can and should be including organizations that, for instance, teach people how to manage stress through activities like yoga. This type of event can make a difference and also continue the positive message that we are deeply invested in ensuring that we go about this set of interactions that comprise our community by making sure that our present and future foundation approaches society and the world in a calm manner, one that has perspective and one that interacts steadily with the various people and groups seeking to do all of this in a healthy and honest fashion. Let's support the creative endeavors of our students. There are a number of hackathons put forward by the community, and that's a great thing and reflective of who we are. But as a community that also supports the arts and creative expression, let's also support the efforts of our students to find artistic outlets. I was recently contacted by one of our students who is here this evening, Varun Tandon, a senior at Homestead High, who would like to put forward a project to have a legal graffiti wall. Varun, if you would stand. Thank you for coming out tonight. This is a fascinating idea, and one that actually intersected recently with environmental issues in my own experience. I ran into Sherry Donnelly and Alex Wyckoff over at City Hall, who are staff members, and they, at this point, were geared out in fluorescent green safety apparel. and they had just returned one morning last week from cleaning out one of our local creeks. Graffiti along a tunneled channel is an issue there, but they told me that from an environmental perspective, the major issue is actually people leaving behind spray cans. And if we put together more of these perspectives and conversations, that's how we start interrelating things like creativity and innovation and activities and their environmental effects. And then we can work towards making the community healthier, happier, safer, and one that meets the promise of our times, which is to be able to translate these ideals into a language of common values that helps us all to be better and to thrive. In Cupertino, as always and everywhere, there is work to do, but the state of our city is positive. We're optimistic and looking forward to the future. And there is one more thing. The title of tonight's talk is The Issue of Cupertino and Our Day. I'd like to end by trying to weave together what we've considered this evening with a couple of thoughts. First, let's be good to each other. You look around our nation and the world these days, and within our communities and interwoven throughout our discussions and our news updates are examples of people not being good to each other. We're all in this together. Second, and very simply, in the end, it's critically important to find and adhere to your sense of accountability. Here's mine. We should be good to each other and hold each other accountable. These days, when I use Face ID, my wife Sharon looks back at me, and this reminds me of several things. How lucky I am, of course. Yes, this is a stern photo of a beautiful person, and it makes me happy and laugh. And then there's the basic honesty captured within it. We are here to be good to each other, but a basic part of that good treatment is, much like our system, to place a check and balance upon each other. I want to thank my fellow residents and friends of Cupertino for all your work and dedication, and I want to thank city staff for all the accountability that you put up with to deliver us the infrastructure, holding together our community, with a particular thanks for this event to Brian Babcock, Colleen Latier, Ray Delgado, Pete Coglianese, Robert Kim, and Michelle Martin for helping coordinate this address. Good night, and be good to each other. Thank you.